I'm Tricia, and this is Phil from SkiTalk.com. We are in the back shop of the SkiTalk headquarters, and we're here today to talk to you about two look bindings that we are going to do a side-by-side comparison and show you why possibly the Look SPX 12 may be the right option for you.
So the Look Pivot has been the quintessential look binding for years. People come in the shop looking specifically for the pivot. If you take a look here, that we have one of the largest pivot collections anywhere. We work with Look directly. We are very instrumental in them bringing back the Pivot 15, but it's the mainstream counterparts that we want to talk about today and help you decide what the best value for a binding might be for you. Now we've got the two options here that we want to work with today, and that is the SPX 12 and also the Pivot 12. Both share the multi-directional toe design, so it has a full 180-degree release out of the toe. Those two are identical, but it's the back half of the bindings is where we see our differences.
So the number one thing, Phil, that you brought up is the quirkiness that people might potentially find in the Look Pivot.
Right.
And I know that I have had the Look Pivot on a pair of my powder skis a few years ago when we had a bunch of snow, and I lost my ski in the snow, and it was actually a little bit difficult to get back on in the deep snow. So that could be one area where this might be the better option.
Right. And with that quirkiness, getting in the pivot can be a little awkward sometimes. Sometimes the pivot at heel does move around, and sometimes when you go to get out, you might not get out completely. That heel pops up, so you got to recock it to get back in. Mm-hmm. And again, as you mentioned, with this brake design of the pivot, sometimes snow can get in that, and you're dealing with that getting in there. And again, if you know that going with the pivot, great. And that's no problem. And again, we're not saying don't buy the pivot, but there are some other options. And when we take a look at the SPX 12, it doesn't have those little quirkinesses. We don't have to deal with that heel turning laterally in there and lining the back up. As far as getting out of the binding, it's much easier to get out of. So that heel, when we open up that heel, it tends to stay out of the way a little bit better than that of the pivot. So that's pretty much the number one reason. Now, number two, we get into the visual aspects of the binding. I mean, the heel design and the colors here are just great with the pivot. But we've got an area here when you go to get out of that binding that if you're using your pole, you're going to scrape up that heel a lot. And you can see it in this image as far as how it's affected different bindings in different colors over the course of the year. So using your pole can damage that binding. Using the base of the skis can also damage the binding as far as scraping from the edges, but also do some damage to the bases.
Right.
So there are some difficulties there. If you see on the SPX over here, we've got a metal cup in here. So using your pole to get out of the heel, you've got that metal cup, so that's going to work better with your pole. Something that, quite frankly, Look had back on the pivot back in the early 80s in the RS series, as you can see the two bindings right here. And if you notice here on the heel, we do also have this metal cover. I'm sorry, not metal cover, this black cover on here, which also does protect that edge a little bit. So visually, if you are using your bases, which we don't recommend to get out, but that does protect it a little bit more.
Every time you talk about that, I shudder.
I know. So next point, number three, and that's the adjustment range of the pivots.
So we have 8 millimeters here.
Yep. And we have over 20 here. So if you're in a situation you might be considering a different size boot down the road, whether you're downsizing or right sizing, whatever reason you're getting a new boot, you might be considering a different adjustment range, and you might be out of the range on the pivot because of that minimum amount that it does have. And where this one here, you might be looking at a remount, the over 20 millimeters that we have here is a huge difference where we're looking at multiple sizes as far as that you can switch in boots.
Far more likely to be able to go up or down a size in a boot without having a full remount.
Exactly. So that's another point difference with that going to the SPX as an option. Number 4, and that's being race bred. A lot of times we get conversations as far as for our readers If a product isn't being used on the World Cup, it's not good enough for them. Okay, that's all well and good. If you're using that as an argument with bindings, they haven't used a pivot on the World Cup in over a quarter century, or in over 25 years. What binding replaced the pivot on the World Cup with the Look athletes that are working with Rosalind and Dean Star? SPX. That's what replaced this binding on the World Cup, because of the coupling to the ski that this binding is able to create a little more performance in that race environment. And we see that a lot when we talk about narrower skis, that we're looking for that connection to the ski and that much more positive coupling, which brings us to number 5.
And that is the brake options.
Right.
And we all know that a big sweet spot in skis that people are getting for daily drivers these days is right in that 90 millimeter range.
Right, that 80 to 90 millimeter wide range is a huge, very popular range of skis right now. There are some system skis out there, but also there's a lot of flat skis being offered, so people can put on their bindings of choice. Now the pivot, we go from a 75 millimeter brake up to a 95 millimeter brake, which leaves a big hole in that range. And the SPX here is available in a 90 millimeter brake, which does work very well with that 80 to 90 millimeter range of skis. For our next point, and that integrates as far as number 6 is the retractable brake that is available here on the SPX. And you can see in this image how the brake does come higher out of the way. So on that 90 millimeter wide brake on an 80 millimeter wide ski, you're not going to worry about hitting that brake on a high edge angle. If we take a look at the pivot and that 95 millimeter brake, it sits much flatter and lower to the deck of the ski. So on a narrower ski and a high edge angle, you might hit those brake arms. So that's another area that the SPX is a very good option.
And the next one is
number 7.
Yep. And the last point we're making here is price. Sometimes the dollar signs matter.
Right. When people say it's not about the money, it's usually about the money. And we talked about that when it comes down to the bindings. With the pivot here, again, very popular, but it's not an inexpensive binding. Price point between these two bindings is about $80, which is not an insignificant amount. So you can save yourself a fair amount of money by going with this SPX 12 with really very minimal cost in performance.
Right.
So you've got a tremendous amount of value here going with this one here. Obviously, you see both bindings here in the Forza 3.0 motif, the coloring on that, but both of these bindings are also available in a multitude of color options. So you've got different colorways that you can get this on either binding that will match your skis, but you're not limited here also with that. So going through our points, we've got number 1, quirkiness. Number 2, the metal cup, which really makes this here, holds its shape and its color much better over the course of time. That adjustment range that we get onto this SPX series of bindings, more than double of what the adjustment range here is of the pivot. And then the race spread and the coupling of your boot to the ski, tremendously strong coupling here when we go with that of the SPX series. More brake options we've got here, and quite frankly, easier to change those brakes on it. We're just unscrews where the pivot, you've got to remove the whole binding to change the brakes. The retractable brake, so for the high edge angles and performance. And number 7 is price. So again, we've got a tremendous value here with this SPX. Don't dismiss it if you're looking to save some money. You've got some fun color choices between all of these bindings, because in the end, skiing is fun.
How's everybody doing? I'm Henry Rivers.
And I'm Karen Rivers.
And we're with the National Brotherhood of Snow Sports. And we only want to tell you one thing. Skiing is fun.
Enjoyable.
If you enjoyed this informative video, hit that bell, subscribe so that you'll stay up to date on the new videos, and check out SkiTalk.com for more ski-related content.
Also, please follow SkiTalk.com on all of your social media channels. Please ask yourself, do you know where your 10mm socket is right now?